Startups are hard. Hang in there, everybody.
Spencer Vascoff, co-founder and we're CEO of Zillow until 2019, which during your time grew to over 4,500 employees, $3 billion in revenue, $10 billion in market capitalization.
As a kid, I watched a lot of entrepreneurship, and that was inspiring to me and helped encourage me in my path to entrepreneurship.
You also co-founded Hotwire, which was sold to Expedia for $685 million.
Two of my companies, Hotwire, which had a crisis 2 years in, and then Zillow that had a crisis 2 years in with the financial crisis. My next company, Picasso, also had this crisis, which was the pandemic. Founders of startups who are listening to this, if you want a simple, safe, stable job, go do something else. That is not what startups are. Being provocative helps drive virality, and that's certainly one of the ways that Zillow grew.
You did allude a little bit to the 2008 crisis. How did you maneuver that?
I would say...
But you come from a family of entrepreneurs, Spencer. So take us back in time to Spencer, like the kid. How did you grow up and how did that shape you?
I was always interested in entrepreneurship and business. I was the kid that would bake cookies and sell them on my street, that would get tracing paper and trace artwork because I wasn't a good artist, but I could I could trace things and sell those tracings to my parents' friends. So I was always hustling and trying to create businesses and make money. And I saw a lot of entrepreneurship all around me. My grandfather was a really successful entrepreneur in the apparel space. He had started a clothing company. My dad was a very successful entrepreneur. He started out as an accountant, and then he became, through a lot of hard work and also some good luck, ended up starting a business management company and tour production company that had clients like the Rolling Stones and U2, David Bowie, Paul Simon, Pink Floyd, Leonard Skinner, and many, many others. And so I watched him pivot his career many times as the technologies of the music industry changed. So when platforms shifted from 8 tracks to, I guess, records to 8 tracks to tapes to CDs to streaming, that had profound implications on how his business had to evolve. As the concert industry changed, he moved more into touring and helped pioneer many aspects of the touring industry that we take for granted today, like the 360 tours, where producers and promoters buy tours outright from the acts and sort of flip the story on who works for whom, and sell broad sponsorships for these international tours, et cetera. So as a kid, I watched a lot of entrepreneurship, and that was inspiring to me and helped encourage me in my path to entrepreneurship.
So Spencer, when you look at your dad like that, and he's probably worked really, really hard, did that create that hunger from early age, or did that scare you? Like, I don't want to work that hard, as crazy as my dad. Like, what did that do as a kid?
I've always worked hard. I worked hard when I was a kid. My one of my most formative experiences early on was playing chess, and I was basically not quite a professional chess player, but I was a very competitive, serious chess player as a kid. I think at age 12, I was the 4th best chess player in the country.
Oh, wow.
I was the captain of our chess team that won middle school championships, and we're basically the best middle school chess team in the country. So basically every weekend I was playing chess tournaments around the country, and you learn a lot from chess as a kid. You learn about the importance of hard work and preparation, of concentration, of just mental focus and mental agility, and ultimately the importance of hard work. So that was my sport, if you will. We can debate whether chess is a sport or not, but to me at the time, it was a sport, and I treated it as such. And then through high school and then beyond, I've always been hardworking. So, I'm not sure if I got that from my parents or just from intrinsic motivation, but that's always been a personality trait.
And it's true. So you were an overachiever from a very early age, and you showed it in school, student body, president, all of that. Am I right? Like you were always kind of pushing yourself.
Yes, that is that is correct. I was
That is you. Okay.
yeah, that's my thing. So I mean, yeah. My main high school activities were I gave up chess by high school, and I was what was called first prefect, which was basically the president of the school and editor in chief of the high school paper. And high school journalism was also a very formative experience for me. I learned a lot about management, leadership, journalism, attention to detail. Time management, working under pressure. These are all things that you learn when you're running what is basically a professional level newspaper, which my high school paper was.
Right. So when you went to college, did you already have in mind that it's going to be entrepreneurship? Because you went kind of to investment banking and that route. Was it by definition? Did you just kind of roll into it? How was it for you?
I wasn't really sure. I think when I started, I worked so hard in high school that when I got to college, I needed to exhale for a moment. So I don't think I was that focused. I did not know what I was going to do after graduating from college when I started college. But I went into investment banking because I wasn't really sure what else to do. And that was a pretty common path back then in the late 90s coming out of my college. And so I started my career at Goldman Sachs. I found that I learned a lot in investment banking, but I wasn't totally satisfied. I wanted to do something a little bit more entrepreneurial and closer to the business operations of companies. And so I left investment banking after my 2-year commitment was complete. I moved to San Francisco. I worked in private equity, which of course buys and sells larger companies. And I enjoyed that. I liked being closer to business operations, but I wanted to be in a smaller, more entrepreneurial environment. And that's how I found my way into startups.
So, and that's fascinating. So you left a very lucrative, well-paying roles, right, in Goldman
Safe,
Sachs
yeah.
and the private equity, very safe, in order to parachute into starting Hotwire. So, how did that happen? Why did that happen?
Um, I was at TPG, Texas Pacific Group, in the late 90s, and was back then one of the largest buyout firms, and they still are today. TPG got its start by buying a couple of airlines. They bought America West Airlines out of bankruptcy, they bought Continental Airlines out of bankruptcy, and they sold part of their Continental stake to Northwest. So by the time I got to TPG, they basically controlled 3 US airlines and 1 European airline. And so we set about at TPG thinking through ways that we could leverage our airline relationships and airline ownership to create an online travel company. And so I helped incubate the idea that would become Hotwire. And then once it was more than just an idea, once it became the beginnings of a company, I asked TPG if I could leave and help run it. And so I left with my co-founder, a guy named Carl Peterson. We both left TPG together to start Hotwire as sort of a spin-off of TPG, the private equity firm that we were both working at. That was in 1999. And things were going very well for the first 2 years. We raised $75 million from TPG and from the airlines. We became one of the top online travel sites. We built a well-known brand that even to this day, 20-something years later, people still talk about and recall. And then September 11th happened in 2001. And September 11th was a huge disaster for the company and for the country and the world. But for the company in particular, it was a near-death experience. I mean, we had to do layoffs. We did a down round. We had customers that were stranded all across the world that couldn't travel after 9/11. We had customers that were scared. We had airline partners that were going out of business. I mean, it was a grim time in 2001 to be running an online travel startup
Right.
after 9/11 when people did not want to travel. We were able to turn the company around. About 2 years later, 2003, we were on a path to go public, and we ultimately sold to Expedia for about $700 million. So it was a very successful turnaround,
Right.
but it was a roller coaster, and
Oh,
every startup
I
is.
Every startup is, but I want to take you to that moment because I think people can really, they probably can't really understand what you went through, but they can start relating to it because that feels like a disaster. When you run a company and you basically, that you have some piece in, people all over, and in this disaster, how do you wake up? Like, how do you take care of yourself, Spencer? Because I think that scares a lot of people, and that's really hard too.
Um, I don't think I took care of myself at the time. That was not
Right.
there was a long list of priorities, and it started with our customers, and then our employees, and then our investors, and then our prospective customers, and at the very bottom of the list is founder health, and that that is very hard, very very hard on founders who are managing their companies during crisis, and also on their families. Um, and Unfortunately, that's startup life. I mean, when things are going okay or when they're going well, I think there is a, enough time to prioritize those types of things. But in a crisis, there's just not. And As I said, every startup is a roller coaster. Even people would look maybe at Zillow and say, "Oh, it's wildly successful," and sure it is, but there were huge ups and downs along the way, and those kind of the downs sort of get ignored when people think
Right.
about the history of these companies. Um, if founders of startups who are listening to this, like if you want a simple, safe, stable job, go do something else. Like that is not what startups, especially tech startups, but really any startups are. Startups are hard, and they they will require that you deprioritize yourself and your family. Unfortunately, for periods of time, it doesn't have to be all the time. It's not sustainable for it to be all the time, but for periods of time during the evolution of your company.
And yeah, I think you're right because Spencer, one of the things that we see all the time is that when people are going through these near death experiences, they quit. So kind
Hmm.
of what I'm trying to understand is you didn't quit on Hotwire. You continued. But I think there's something like how do you even sleep at night? Like there's
Yeah.
some areas where you're like, I'm suffocating. So how do you go through this?
Well, I mean, I think there's some founders who think of their company as an extension of themselves, and so they just can't. And like they like letting it fail is like failure is not really an option.
Yeah.
And I mean, some companies in that category still fail nonetheless. And then there are other founders that view every startup that they do as a learning experience. And by the way, it's quite clear in pitches which category founders fall into. I mean, like I've been pitched founders of a second or third startup, for example, and I'll say, "Well, tell me what happened to your first startup," and they'll say, "Oh, well, it failed because of X, Y, Z," and I'll ask a couple probing questions, and in their description, they're clearly too blasé about their prior company's failure, and they're like I want to see from them that it it weighed on them, that they cared
Right.
deeply, that they gave it their all, um, and so that's a turnoff if people are sort of shrug their shoulders about past failures. Um, in terms of how we persisted at Hotwire, I think it helps, frankly, when the world is falling apart all around you because it's not quite as lonely. So we were in a category of online travel that the whole thing was a bit of a
Right.
mess, right? And so it didn't feel that personal. It wasn't like, oh, we made a mistake and therefore our company is failing. I think that would be a lot harder. Zillow, I managed through a very similar set of circumstances in 2008 through the financial crisis. And
Right.
similarly, the mortgage meltdown and the foreclosure crisis was affecting the whole country, the whole world, but certainly our industry of real estate. And so we were not alone. And I think that helped quite a bit because we as a management team didn't feel like we had made any, like this wasn't of our own making. This was macro. And now we have to fight through it as best we can.
Okay. That makes sense. I don't know if that makes it a lot less scary, but maybe a little less lonely.
Yeah,
So,
well said. That's a good description. That's great.
okay. So you recover from 9/11. You sell it to Expedia. Um, and you spent some time in Expedia. Why, then, start Zillow? Like, how did that form? And I think there's also some people that also left Zillow. Can you share a little bit of that story?
Yeah, absolutely. I I joined Expedia in 2003 and left in 2005. Um, I I wanted to be at a company at a size company where I felt I could make more of a difference and where there was a ton of innovation happening that I could be a part of. And so I basically wanted to be back at a startup again. And so I left Expedia and I reached out. I, as the co-founder of Hotwire that had recently sold to Expedia, I reached out to the co-founders of Expedia who had recently left Expedia, and we joined up and spent a couple months brainstorming startup ideas. And we, all three of us were shopping for homes at that time. I was buying my first home, and we were pregnant with our first child, and it felt like the right time to buy a house. And I was surprised. Here we are in 2005. The internet is more than 10 years old, and yet the state of websites for shopping for home was pretty terrible. And we started messing around with doing mashups of Google Maps with Craigslist listings, with listings from MLS data, with county data that we could glean from King County, which is the county that Seattle is in. And it became clear that although there were plenty of websites out there, there were no real estate sites that prioritized the consumer. Everything back then prioritized the real estate agent. And we thought that was backwards, that we could build something that prioritized the consumer experience rather than the agent experience. And so that was the genesis of Zillow. And the product insight was, rather than focusing on what's for sale, which many other real estate websites do, why don't we try to answer a different question, which is, what's my house worth? And that's where the Zestimate came from. And the Zestimate is Zillow's opinion of what every home's value is. And so figuring out that first version of the Zestimate was what we then took another couple months to launch. And we launched in, I believe in 2006. I forget what month. But when we launched Zillow, we had 1 million visitors on our first day. We had 4 million visitors in our first month. It was one of the fastest launches of any consumer product. And that's because the voyeurism and virality of seeing what people's houses are worth is so significant, of being able to Zillow all your friends and see what your ex-girlfriend's house is worth and what your parents' house is worth and what your boss's house is worth and what your podcast interviewer's house is worth. All of that is super fun and a little creepy, but creepy is not necessarily bad because being provocative helps drive virality. And that's certainly one of the ways that Zillow grew.
Did you know? Did you realize that what you're creating will go so viral? Or was it an experiment and, feels more like you created your own luck to some extent?
We did not know that it would be, it would grow so big so quickly. We hoped. I think when we started to know was a couple weeks before launch, when there was a good product in test, and we were able to start using it, and we could see, and the employees, I think there were probably 20 or so employees at the time. We could see the addictive nature of being able to zoom over a neighborhood with a God's eye view and see the price of every home. And so, we hoped at that point, but it actually, although we had a very fast start, what really catapulted Zillow was mobile. And that wasn't until a couple years later, and with the creation of the smartphone and the GPS-enabled smartphones and the creation of the App Store, which I'm happy to talk about how that helped Zillow
Yeah,
grow.
I
But
definitely want to go there. I want to go into two things, Spencer, that I think are fascinating for our listeners. Because first of all, there's this notion, at least in the Silicon Valley world, that get out as fast as you can, get out scrappy, etc. But when you get out very scrappy, you wouldn't see suddenly, millions of people usually on like there's needs to be a little bit more baking in order to get to the millions that you've seen. So first of all, how do you balance between like the MVP or the minimal viable product versus going with something that is good enough for it to really go
yeah.
viral? How do you balance the two?
It's a great question, and I teach a course on entrepreneurship at Harvard to undergrads, and we spend a whole week on this exact question. So I'll try to answer it briefly, more briefly than I do when I teach it. There's an adage which I do subscribe to, which is that if you're not somewhat embarrassed by the first version of your product, then you waited too long to ship it. So in general, you just want to get something out there and start learning, and that's what building an MVP is all about. There are some exceptions where it makes sense to slow things down in order to be, to have a more fully formed MVP. One is in categories where you can't have it be just okay. And so this is things like, blood testing, for example,
Yes.
right? Like, you can't have a high degree of inaccuracy. Another though is, if there's just like a really obvious product feature that's really important for the launch. So in the case of Zillow, I made the very unpopular decision to delay the launch by, I want to say it was maybe a month or two. And this was, by the way, after it took us almost 6 months to come up with the idea and then 6 months to build it. So about a year that this team had been eating ramen noodles and not collecting salary and not being able to tell friends or family what we were working on, and everyone kind of wondering, why did you leave Expedia, et cetera. So to delay that by an extra 2 to 3 months was a lot. And the extra feature that I slowed things down to include was to allow homeowners to claim their home and edit their home facts, because I knew that people were going to see they were going to see this estimate of their home and they were going to have an opinion about it. And the opinion probably wouldn't be so great. And so we wanted to give them something to do. And the something to do is that they can actually impact it by saying, no, hold on, I have 3 bedrooms, not 2 bedrooms, or I have 3,000 square feet, not 2,000 square feet. Because a lot of the inaccuracies of those early estimates were because of incorrect property data that we got from public record information. So we slowed things down to build that feature where people could claim and edit their home. And I think that was a worthwhile delay. And so I use that as an example. There are many products out there where perhaps there's 1 or 2 features that just delaying for a little longer might make sense, even though in general you want to get your MVP out there as quickly as you can.
Got it. That makes a ton of sense. So now you are literally jumping on the wagon of mobile, which I think is something really, really interesting because, as we know, some companies completely missed the boat. First of all, how did you realize that you need to be mobile first? And you changed everything. You changed the way, you changed Zillow completely to be mobile. Can you talk a little bit about it, Spencer?
Absolutely. The iPhone had been out for a year and everybody had one, or everyone at our company had one, but there were no apps on the early iPhone. It's hard to imagine that today, but the only apps on the first iPhones were the Apple apps. So you had mail, you had text, you had calendar, you had stocks, you had weather, and that was about it. Calculator, and that was it. There were no apps. And I remember sitting at my desk and watching Steve Jobs at WWDC, the Worldwide Developer Conference of Apple, and announcing that they were going to create an app store and they were going to let third-party developers, people like Zillow, build apps that people could then download in the App Store. And I was floored. I stood up from my desk. I ran over to my co-founder and said, we need to pivot the whole company to mobile. This is going to change everything because this is when you want Zillow, is when you're untethered from your desk. It's when you're driving around looking at houses. It's when you're walking around a neighborhood. It's when you're at a cocktail party at someone's house. Like, that's when you want Zillow. It's not when you're at your desk. It's when you're away from your desk. And so if this can work on a smartphone through an app, oh my God. By the end of the week, we had changed the name of the company from Zillow.com to just Zillow, because .com really denotes a website, and I felt strongly that we were not a website anymore. We were a service, which was going to be mobile first. I had announced to the company that every product and design meeting had to start with mobile screenshots. And anyone that showed desktop screenshots before mobile screenshots, the meeting would just be ended right at that moment. I think I only had to do that once or twice, where I would just walk out of a meeting and declare the meeting over, and people learned pretty quick that we were going to be a mobile first company. And within a couple months, we had the first version of the Zillow iPhone app out, and I was right. Not only we have three things that were special. Number one, as I already said, the consumer wanted to use our app on mobile. Number two, we had much less competition on mobile than on desktop, because the real estate brokerage companies that had decent websites that we competed with, they were nowhere on mobile. So it was a much better competitive landscape for us. And number three, you sort of alluded to this, number three, we actually monetized on mobile in a way that most other companies didn't. So if you think of Facebook, for example, that when they went public, half of their usage was on mobile, and they had never run an ad on mobile before. And that's why the Facebook IPO was such a debacle, because it was unclear how they were going to monetize on mobile. And with a small screen on mobile, there's less real estate, no pun intended, to sort of pop up ads or whatever. And so a lot of advertising models monetize very badly on mobile. Well, Zillow monetizes much better on mobile because of click to call. So when I'm looking at a home, on my iPhone or Android, I can now click and call or click to text. And so it generates more leads, and more highly qualified leads, than desktop, where you can't click to call. So not only do we have a better product that consumers liked, that had a less competitive landscape, we made more money from mobile usage than desktop usage. And that was a really rare thing for a startup or for any tech company to have at that time.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like you're basically relentless on understanding your audience avatar. Like, you understand that they're not going to be on desktop. They will be roaming around. They will be driving. And you're relentless on trying to understand, what do they need when they are driving around? They are looking for homes. And that started, it became and together with being very attentive to what's coming. So it sounds like it's that constantly being relentless about what is really needed versus what I'm building, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Zillow, you use the word avatar, which I like. At Zillow, we use the word persona. Beth the buyer, Susan the seller, Harriet the homeowner, Alan the agent. Those are the most important personas at Zillow. And if you walk the halls of Zillow, well, I guess you can't do that anymore because it's a remote company now. But when I was CEO, it was in an office company. If you walked the halls back then, you would see posters of these personas, and you'd hear employees talking about, oh, Beth wants this feature, or Rachel the renter wants that feature, or we should build this for Susan. So yes, understanding your consumer and your professional personas and building for them is critically important. And that's exactly how we ran Zillow.
Amazing. So you did allude a little bit to the 2008 crisis. How did you maneuver that?
It was hard, not easily. I mean, I wrote a blog post in 2007 that's probably out there on the web still somewhere, on Zillow's blog, that said that the headline was "The tidal wave is coming." And it was quite easy for us to see in our data that we were going to have a foreclosure crisis. You could see the increasing number of late payments and mortgage delinquencies and the increasing number of short sales and the reduction in homeowners' equity. So you could sort of see it in 2007. I wish I had been had the foresight to place some giant short trade on mortgage-backed securities, and then maybe I would have been in the book and movie Moneyball, or not Moneyball, sorry, The Big Short. But I did not. But anyway, so we saw that in 2007. When 2008 happened and the mortgage meltdown happened, we right-sized the company. Unfortunately, we did layoffs. We went from about 200 people to about 150. We refocused the company. We closed down some initiatives. We tightened the belt. We worked harder and smarter. We increased the level of communication with our employees to make sure they stayed motivated and focused. We became more metrics focused. We just became a better run company in order to make it through that recession. What I learned from it all was to increase the level of communication with employees and to see the silver lining, because there definitely was a silver lining for us at Zillow. The silver linings were that the industry, the real estate agents, brokerages, and MLSs, were willing to experiment with new things more during that downturn. They cut back advertising on newspapers so that they could lower their spend. And when the coast started to become more clear and the dust settled and the clouds lifted, they were more willing to spend more on online advertising like Zillow, online lead generation, than they were before. So it accelerated the pace of the migration from offline real estate advertising to online real estate advertising, which Zillow benefited from. It increased the industry's willingness to syndicate listings to sites like Zillow. And it turned out it was very similar to 2001 with online travel. 2001, after 9/11, accelerated the pace with which consumers shifted their behavior from offline to online purchases. It accelerated the embrace of hotels and airlines of online distribution. So it sucked, and I don't, I'm not glad that it happened, these two downturns, but in some weird way, it actually made both those companies more successful, even though it was a really challenging time to manage through.
Well, I think you get more. I mean, first of all, you as a company or as an individual, there is a little bit that you get a little more creative when things are hard, right? So you have to
sure.
figure things out, and that creates more efficiencies. And we saw it, we'll go into the pandemic later, but, we saw it in the pandemic, how much innovation actually happened in the pandemic or it kind of accelerated a lot of the things that were not, where people didn't necessarily adopt until they had to. But I still want to go into Zillow for a second, because you, at some point, become CEO. So first of all, and you've played a lot of different roles, which I think is also a big part of, when you need to be number one, it really helps when you understand, you have a very broad look at different things. How did you become CEO, Spencer? And what do what would you say to someone else that wants to kind of like get on a kind of fast path?
So when we started the company, I was CMO, Chief Marketing Officer, and my co-founder was CEO. And then I think it was about a year into the company's history, basically, once we raised the Series A and it looked like we were probably going to make it, then he stepped back and became chair of the board, and I became CEO. And then I was CEO for, I think, 10 or 11 or 12 years. And then when I retired from that, he stepped back in from chair to move back to CEO for a couple of years. And he just stepped down. And one of my former colleagues is CEO. So, it's quite helpful for a CEO to have played many roles. For a while there, for that first year, I was the CMO, I was the CFO, I was the COO, I was head of industry relations. I sort of had lots of jobs, just as I did at Hotwire. I think the benefit of that is you have a lot more empathy for your direct reports, and and you become more well-rounded because you have a broader perspective on things, and I think that helps you make better decisions and helps you manage and motivate your team better.
Okay, so you knew from the get-go that you'll take the CEO role, or was that?
No, not necessarily. Well, we had it was sort of implied when we started the company. I don't think it was explicit. The sort of my co-founder had taken Expedia public previously and didn't feel the need to or have or want to run another company at that point in time or take it public. So the plan all along was essentially once we got on a good path and it looked like things were going to be okay, then he would move into that role and I would step into the CEO role. So that was the expectation. It wasn't explicit; it was sort of implicit. But yes,
Right.
that's how it played out.
How did you feel about the difference between being CEO and all the rest? Because it is different being kind of when sort of the buck stops here and most of the decisions need to be channeled, although there's boards and stuff, but still.
Yeah, I
What's
mean,
the difference?
I tend to lead by consensus and view the role of the CEO as more of a coach than a boss. So, uh, I mean, I don't know. I don't really feel like it takes on that much more responsibility or stress. It's more like the CEO is the air traffic control that's trying to get everybody to work together, keep them motivated, and coordinate from different parts of the organization. So I never really felt like, wow, now heavy weighs the crown. You're the CEO and all eyes on you, or whatever. It was. That's just. I mean, I think if I managed that way, then maybe I would have felt that way. But that wasn't really how I managed. I was a real. I tried to be a consensus builder and manage it as a team rather than being a direct giving directives.
What about when things are really, really hard or scary or you need to lay off? Like, do you still have the same, or does it still weigh on the CEO a little more than others or
I
the
mean, it
CEO?
does weigh a little more, but I mean, I remember the meeting in 2008 where we did layoffs. It sucked. I lost sleep over it. It was brutal, and but frankly, I'm pretty sure that my direct reports felt equally crappy about it and had all the same stress because, as I say, the way I managed was, hey, we're all running this company together. My title might be CEO and your title might be CTO and your title might be CMO, but we're a leadership team together, so we all should feel responsibility for
Right.
things. So yes, I think it's a little bit more as CEO, but not. I'm not sure it's
No,
that
not a,
different. At least the way we ran the company.
that's
There,
amazing.
see, I
And
just
I
did it.
mean,
I just said,
you,
subconsciously the way we ran the company,
we,
not the way
yeah,
I ran
I
the company.
heard that. So you grew it to incredible market size, and which is and then at some point, I think 2019, if I'm not wrong, you decide to leave. First of all, why? And we're going to talk a little bit about all the great things that you're doing now, Spencer.
Sure. So about 5 years earlier, maybe 4 years earlier, when I was still CEO of Zillow, I moved from Seattle to Los Angeles. I'd been in Seattle for about 15 years, and I wanted to be in Los Angeles because my parents were there, my wife's parents were there, and we needed to move closer to home where we both grew up, which is Los Angeles. So for several years, for 3 or 4 years, I was commuting from LA to Seattle every single week,
Oh, that's
and
brutal.
that was hard. that was very exhausting. And so by 2019, I started the company. I'd taken it public. I'd got it to profitability. I got it to 20 billion market cap. I had launched these new businesses and felt like I had sort of accomplished everything I hoped to accomplish there, and I was tired of commuting, so it seemed like a good time to retire from that role. So that's why I stepped down in 2019, and it was a seamless transition because my co-founder, who had been chairman all that time, just stepped in as CEO. So easy squeezy.
Right. And then there's pandemic for you. How did that?
Yeah, I didn't predict that. I didn't predict that. So I mean, I stayed on the board for about a year and then starting new companies at that point. And once I started starting new companies, it didn't really make sense for me to stay on the board of Zillow. The pandemic, I was gone from Zillow by the time that was in full swing, so I can't really speak to how Zillow managed through it.
Mhm.
I can tell you, I mean, you've heard now two of my companies, Hotwire, which had a crisis 2 years in, and then Zillow that had a crisis 2 years in with the financial crisis. My next company, Picasso, also had this crisis, which was the pandemic. So we started Picasso right before the pandemic, and Picasso is co-ownership of luxury vacation homes. So it's sort of like a NetJets for vacation homes. And the idea for Picasso is that people co-own the home with other families that they don't necessarily know. So when the pandemic happened, I said, "Oh my God, like it's happening again for a third time, because are people really going to be willing?" I mean, just remember how people were afraid of germs back then. Like we weren't even accepting packages. Like you'd leave your groceries in at your front door or at the garage for 6 hours, or your Amazon packages, and in order to let the cooties wash away. Like, so are people really going to own a house together with strangers? Like, oh my God, people are never going to accept that health risk. So I was pretty worried about the impact very worried that it would have on Picasso. It turned out that the pandemic and the quarantine was very good for Picasso. Again, silver lining, just like Hotwire had, just like Zillow had. The silver lining was demand for second homes went through the roof when people started working from home and people wanted a place to get away from their primary residence. So Picasso had a rocket ship start. It was the fastest company to become a unicorn. We raised over $200 million of venture capital. We sold tons and tons of these vacation homes. And then the next crisis that we faced was mortgage rates that skyrocketed. So within a 6-month period, mortgage rates went from about 2% up to 10%. And nobody's ever seen that type of increase in mortgage rates. And that had a huge chilling effect on interest in second homes. And so here we are again. I kind of made it through the quarantine issue, but facing yet another crisis in my company's history. And Picasso had to manage through that. We closed some markets, we downsized the company, we refocused, we tightened the belt. We did all the things that we did at Hotwire and Zillow. And now here we are as we record this in late 2024. Picasso is on the upswing, and we've sold about $1 billion of these vacation homes. We've got thousands of very happy owners. We're in over 40 markets in 4 countries, and Picasso is by no means through out of the woods entirely, but feels a lot better today than it did a couple years ago.
That's incredible adaptability. And if I'm not mistaken, you're also taking outside investors into Picasso, if I'm not mistaken, right? There's something about
That's right.
that?
So Picasso is doing something pretty cutting edge right now. We're doing what's called a Reg A offering, or a Regulation A offering, which is a round that retail investors, individual people, are able to invest in. And the reason we're doing this is it's very consistent with our mission. What Picasso tries to do is democratize access to second homes, to something that is typically only available to very wealthy people. And private venture funded companies are also typically not available to retail investors. They typically have to wait until these companies go public. The SEC created something called Reg A as part of the Jobs Act about 10 years ago, which lets private companies raise capital in this way. So we publish our results with the SEC just like a public company would. We sell shares to the public just like a public company would. But the shares don't trade on an exchange just yet, not until the companies go public. So that's what Picasso's in the midst of. We just launched this last week in early October of 2024. It's an exciting, cutting edge way to allow individual people to invest in a private venture funded startup. Don't let the VCs have all the fun. And,
exactly, which is usually closed. Yeah. So that's very exciting. And I think you're involved with a few other things. What is your mission now? Like, how do you? And I want you to tell a little bit about these things. But how do you see your mission now?
So, I mean, when I left Zillow, I started something called 75 and Sunny Ventures, which is my family office venture fund. And what we do is we start companies. So it's basically a personal startup studio. I've started 7 companies in the last couple of years through this. Picasso is the largest and best known and the most late stage of them. the 7 companies, 3 of them are former Zillow teams that we used to work together. 3 of the 7 are in prop tech or in the real estate tech space. 4 are not. The common theme across most of them is democratizing access to something that only a small portion of people have access to. So Picasso is all about helping people own a second home that might not otherwise be able to, or might not be able to afford such a nice second home, and they're doing it through co-ownership. Libby or HeyLibby.ai is one of my startups, and HeyLibby.ai is an AI sales receptionist for small businesses. So big companies have artificial intelligence responders. Like if you call United Airlines or you go to American Airlines website, you'll interact with basically an AI chatbot and talk with, I want to change my flight, or can you issue me a refund or whatever. So big companies have that, but small businesses don't. And so what HeyLibby.ai does is it creates for any small business, whether you're a plumber, an electrician, a housekeeper, a wedding photographer, a spa operator, hairdresser, et cetera. It lets you create your own AI sales receptionist that will do triage with your customers when they're reaching out to you for different things. So that's that business. It's a former team from Zillow. We've raised a couple $1 million of venture capital, and it's an early stage startup. And then I won't go through all 7, don't worry. But just to tell you about one other, for example, a company called Q, which is QUEUE, is one of my startups that lets people track what to watch and figure out what streaming services different TV shows or films are available on. So it's sort of like a social TV guide. And it's solving the problem of figuring out what to watch, because streaming has become so fragmented that it's very hard to know what's where or what you're watching where. And it used to be easy when you could look in the paper and see the TV listings. Now it's too fragmented. And so we've built a social layer on top of a TV guide, essentially. So that's what Q does. We have millions of downloads. We've raised a couple $1 million of venture capital.
Incredible. So it sounds like you're basically having fun and still creating an impact. That's what I'm hearing, basically.
Yeah, I mean, you asked a good question, which is like, what motivates me, or what's the common thread here? The common thread is I'm trying to build products that I want to exist in the world, and I'm trying to do them with founding teams that want my mentorship and counsel. So for each of these 7 companies, I'm not the CEO. I'm the chairperson, I'm the founder, and I motivate them and I mentor them. And it's just an extension of how I led at Zillow. And in that case, I was the CEO and I was leading my direct reports. And in this case, it's just across 7 different companies. But I exist to help them achieve their full potential. And that's what motivates me and what I spend my time doing.
And that's brilliant, because mentorship at this level of somebody that builds such mega things, it is freakingly rare. So, I mean, it's just really remarkable. So I just love that. What would based on everything you've done, and you lived probably a lifetime that usually people live in, multiple people in many, many, centuries. But what would be an advice to yourself or to our listeners that maybe they want more for themselves, maybe they don't exactly know what, but they're, they know that there's more out there. They're just not sure what it is, how to get there, how to maximize their potential. What would be some of the advice that, based on all these years of experience?
I would say be curious. Go deep on things. I'll give you a quick example from. I teach a course. One of the things I do is I teach this course on entrepreneurship. I think I mentioned, and one of my students told me that she just became super obsessed. This is an undergrad in college. Became obsessed with packaging with Amazon. She's like, how come this Amazon package has these airbags in it, and how come this one comes in an envelope and this one comes in a box? And how does Amazon make these decisions? And so she went super deep on this, and listened to podcasts, watched YouTube videos, started interviewing experts on the topic, went super deep, kept all these notes. kind of like crazy, beautiful mind, like, yarn on a whiteboard kind of thing, trying to learn everything she could about this. And coming out the other end from that has emerged a couple startup ideas that she might go start companies, or maybe she'll go work at one of these companies. And so, most people are curious about something and they just like, I don't know, they sort of shrug their shoulders. But she decided to go super deep and learn. The second piece of advice I would say is to surround yourself with great people who are really smart and motivated and make you better. And that's been the key to success in my whole career, because one of these successes that I've been involved in has been a team effort. And so you need to be able to attract people that you can motivate and that motivate you, and put yourself in situations where you'll be interacting with those types of people that will bring out the best in you and allow you to create and build.
And to me, that is so important, because there's also a lot of negativity. There's a lot of naysayers. There's a lot of, if you want to surround yourself with things that will, crush you, like that's easy to do. I think it's harder to find the people that will actually lift you, mentor you, tell you the truth when you need to hear the truth, all of that. So, and that's incredible. And I think the curiosity is an incredible tip, because you're right. People just move on, right? They see something, but instead of going deep, you want to be obsessed with whatever it is, in order to take it to a next level, which is amazing to hear. Spencer, this was so inspiring. Thank you for sharing all your experience. Again, been following you for a long time, and it's just been so great to hear the story in real life, sort of.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, and thank you for having me. And startups are hard. Hang in there, everybody. Hang in there.
And do big things.
Yeah.
I love it. Thank you, Spencer. More episodes that you're going to love are right around the corner, so definitely make sure to click the like button and subscribe to our channel. Also, who in your life should see this today? Do share this with them. This will inspire and help those you care about, and helps us continue to bring amazing guests. And I will see you there.